Oh my fucking god. Oh my fucking god.
Victory in my grasp! Give me something to cry about!
There it is. 2 mil. Oh my god, it went negative, dude. It literally went negative. I think if I throw my action skill at him, well, I think we found damage cap. Yo, guys, what is up? Max on Borderlands 4 video, and today we're going over. I mean, I don't even really know what to call this. This is an Amon setup that we just discovered that can hit 2 billion plus damage. It is. I don't think there's anything that comes close to the amount of damage that this build does in the game. It is absolutely ridiculous. With the Amon skills getting fixed, there's some new synergies and some new stuff that allows us to hit for billions of damage on Amon, which is just ridiculous. I hope you guys enjoy the video. Let's get right into it. So in order for this damage to occur, you do need to get a lucky proc. If you don't get a lucky proc, you still are dealing most of the time like 300 to 400 million damage. You do need to crit to get it into the billions, though. We'll see if I get lucky here. But we're going to do our little rotation. I'll explain everything in a second. But do our little rotation and then do that. That we didn't get a lucky proc. We still did. That was like 245 million damage. Let's give it another go. All right, let's see if we get lucky.
A surprise party? Thunder!
Those are decent. That is about to hit a billion. There is a billion on-screen damage. Didn't get a great initial proc of our shot, but that took us, technically that was our second try. But yeah, a billion on-screen damage as Amon on a dummy. Just note that, like, you have to intentionally nerf yourself and make the build worse in order to see this damage on bosses. Nothing using the proper setup will survive the initial damage and the shot. Currently, there isn't an enemy that exists in the game that would be able to like display this actual value of dot damage. Even nerfing ourselves to do this, we're still dealing like tens of millions of damage per dot tick. But yeah, a billion damage on Amon. It can go up to 2 billion if we got like a better initial shot. But yeah, just ridiculous. So what is actually like going on? What is causing all of this damage? So this has to do with an interaction between Force of Nature and Amon's newly buffed or fixed Raging Inferno. Now, Raging Inferno reads that action skill damage has a chance to critically hit. Additionally, critical hits from direct action skill damage apply burn. Now, this allows our action skills to crit, and then when they do, we get a big burn proc, and the majority of our damage is coming from this burn damage. Our initial burst might do 40 to 50 million damage, which is, once again, more than enough to one-shot every single enemy in the game, but then we can trigger a detonation, and that detonation is all of that damage basically again, which double dips like everything, and then procs a dot that can hit for like 250 million a tick. Is so far the highest I've seen, and it ticks multiple times. So in order for Raging Inferno to deal all this massive damage, we need to have an action skill that hits really hard. And like you technically could use like Molten Roll or one of his other abilities to do an action skill that hits really hard. However, Force of Nature is like by far and away the winner here because it's going to allow us to scale our damage like crazy. Force of Nature reads, while Onslaughter is active, gun damage dealt to enemies will prime them for a duration and then will detonate when they die or are damaged by a forward skill, dealing incendiary damage to nearby enemies. Now, this explosion is considered as action skill damage, and it's going to convert basically all of the gun damage that we deal to a target as to action skill damage on detonation. And that detonation damage deals 100% of our gun damage dealt, and we get 10 stacks of this. So if we're shooting a spread launcher with with like amp and all of our buffs, and using things like Dragon's Breath to get a 200% damage increase, we're going to hit an enemy really, really hard, and then we're going to store that all as action skill damage. Then when we detonate that, that's going to get double dip all of our like fire damage, our action skill damage. It's going to proc a huge hit, and if that hit crits, that's kind of the RNG part. Then it's going to proc a Raging Inferno dot, which is once again going to like double dip our like burn damage and our action skill damage, all our like all damage dealt modifiers. So basically, we've got a double dip into another double dip, which is allowing us to hit for billions of damage. All right, for our skill tree, we've tweaked this around a little bit. But we're going to be going points into what burns within, more incendiary damage. Then we pick up Wield the Storm for more status effect damage and duration. Status effects are a big part of our damage. Because we're mainly focusing on one-shots, we're going to go Tritanium Knuckles for the 20% extra skill damage. Don't really care about the melee damage there. Then we're going down into the far right tree for Catastrophe. Whenever we apply Shock, we get crit chance. Whenever we apply Burn, we get crit damage. This is just nice quality of life. Gives us a better chance to crit, which is great. And then the big damage increase is Dragon's Breath. Whenever we activate our Ordnance, our next gunshot is converted to incendiary damage. This gives us a massive damage amp and will allow us to proc much bigger explosions from Force of Nature. And then we put 1 point into Electrical Fire so that whenever we're applying burns, we get Shock. Just gives us a little bit more consistency with Catastrophe and more damage. And then we're using Storm Cutter. Storm Cutter is not dealing damage. We're not scaling the damage of Storm Cutter necessarily for our burns, but it is a safe way to proc our Force of Nature detonation. It's a little bit easier to use than like having to use like the Big Slam, although the Big Slam would look cool. And then for our like actual green tree skill, we're going to be putting points into Executioner. This gives us more crit damage. We've got Destruction Engine for 40% increased detonation damage. The next points here, there's not a lot of great things. We don't really need kill skills with like crit chance. Don't really need increased shock damage. I just went bolt action for the bonus shock damage. If you are using this for mobbing, which we'll talk about, is pretty nice. Then Raging Inferno is what this build is really built around. We get this like double dipping burn damage, which procs for hundreds of millions. And then lastly, Wild Heart for 33% increased status effect damage. For the gear for the build, we're going to be using spread launchers for our one shots. These are great because they're the like pretty much highest instance of damage in the game as a single hit. For like bossing, just so we could see the dot damage and not one-shot the bosses like the Inceptus kill that's playing on screen. I was using a 12k spread launcher, which is some of the lowest possible damage I think you can get on a spread launcher, just so we could see what the build looks like, because otherwise, for like doing the like 2 billion damage, we were using this spread launcher, which is a 34k spread launcher. I do believe this is around the highest value you can get on a spread launcher. This is what was leading us to like those 2 billion hits. Even if you don't have a max damage spread launcher, once again, you're still overkilling just about everything in the game. So yeah, spread launchers for bossing. And then if you want to mob with this build, it's going to be a little bit different. If you've seen my Wildfire Amon build, this build would basically just play like Wildfire Amon using the Stellium, which is a high dot damage shotgun. You can pair that with the Prime Potency Malon enhancement so that you're constantly proccing status effects after every reload. To set up mobbing on this properly would be a little bit different because you'd want different like firmware basically entirely. I thought the coolest part of this build was the bossing, but I will have a planner linked in the description if you do want to just focus on like mobbing with this setup. But that's kind of what you would use, is using like a Stellium with the Potency Malon enhancement so that you're just constantly proccing huge dots on everything. You could also use a Hot Slugger just because we've got a bunch of like instance damage and shotgun buffs. But yeah, mainly using Spread Launcher for bossing. I'm sure you could use other things as well. For our rep kit, I'm using an Overshield amp rep kit. The Overshield is super nice because we're going to be using a Watts for dinner, and if we use a Overshield, that means we get guaranteed 25% bonus shock damage. That's way more damage than like an Enrage roll would give us, for example. So that's pretty huge. I am throwing a crit knife. Technically, you don't need to use a crit knife. We're at like currently the crit knife is setting your crit chance to 30%. Right now, with this crit chance on my action skill having 21% crit chance, plus the specialization for a honed mind, puts us at That puts us at 26% crit chance. So we're only actually getting like 4% crit chance from throwing the knife. It does override your crit. Definitely not needed, but it does help for the consistency of getting our action skill to proc. For our action skill, we're using a Furnace with 5 points into Dragon's Breath and 2 points into Inferno. I do think that this could get some crazy things if you had 5 into Raging Inferno and 2 into Dragon's Breath. I don't have that to mess around with right now, but that could also be really, really sick. I do think potentially Dragon's Breath would be the higher damage value because it's more upfront damage, but those are the 2 skills you're looking for. Doesn't need to be +5 or +2 into one or the other. Just get a Furnace with these points in, and you will be hitting really, really hard. For our shield, we're using a Watts for Dinner with Amp. This is going to allow us to hit harder on the initial proc. And then lastly, I was using a enhancement with the Jacob's crit. Once again, this wasn't really necessary because we're crit knifing, so the actual 20% is basically ignored. We get set to 30%, but mine had gun damage, gun splash, and gun crit. Note that before we optimized this build, like before I was wearing this, I was using this enhancement with gun damage, gun fire rate, and splash damage with like Torg license parts, which like doesn't even apply because the spread launcher doesn't even have Torg. I wasn't wearing nearly as good of a Furnace, and we still hit for 2 billion damage. Like my gear is really strong right now, and it looks sick, but I promise you, you do not need like as crazy gear to hit these numbers. This like inherent setup and build is just very, very broken right now. And then lastly, for our firmware, we're using Action Fist. This gives us the 30% action skill damage, which is what we really care about. We're also using Goo JFC for the 15% action skill damage. Once again, the big proc here is going to be our action skill damage, which is going to get this reapplied. And then we're using one God Killer. One God Killer is 10% more damage against bosses. It's a multiplier. And so this is the highest damage firmware setup that we can be rocking right now. For our specializations, we're rocking In the Zone. I don't have a lot of skill points on Amon for specializations, so like I don't have the availability to use something like best defense on this build. I would definitely take the best defense over something like In the Zone. Just like currently I'm only level 57 on Amon, but In the Zone, while we're aiming to our spread launcher, we get extra gun and crit damage. We absolutely have to spec into I Am a Gun for the massive increase to action skill damage, and a Honed Mind for when our action skill does crit, it does 50% increased damage. And then the last point you could kind of put wherever. I put it into Groundbreaker because we're doing all of this damage. If something wouldn't survive a 2 billion damage dot, you could then technically punch them for 20% of your 2 billion dot and just, you know, overkill again. Very curious to how much health Bloom Reaper is going to have when it comes out. Honestly, this build might not make it to Bloom Reaper. Guys, that is going to do it for the video. I apologize. This was a little bit rushed. I wanted to get it out there because this is a freaking insane setup. I will have the Harlow build out tomorrow morning. Appreciate your guys' patience on that. It's all done and it's ridiculous. But yeah, this Amon setup is so fun. I hope you guys enjoyed. I will catch y'all in the next one. Take care, guys. Peace.